Sarah Blackwood placed the large cardboard box on her dining room table with a gentle thud. Dust particles danced in the afternoon sunlight streaming through her apartment windows. 3 weeks had passed since her grandmother Eleanor's funeral, and the lawyer had finally released the personal effects mentioned in the will. "Just what I needed," Sarah muttered to herself. More antiques to sort through. At 32, Sarah worked as a digital archivist at the Richmond Historical Society, a job that usually satisfied her love of history. But today, confronting her own family's past felt different, more raw, more personal. She cut through the packing tape with scissors and folded back the box flaps. Inside lay neatly stacked photo albums, bundles of letters tied with faded ribbon, and several small wooden boxes. A handwritten note from the lawyer rested on top. "As per Eleanor Blackwood's wishes, these family heirlooms now belong to you, her only grandchild." Sarah lifted out the first album, its leather cover cracked with age. Opening it carefully, she found black and white photographs mounted on thick black paper. Each photo had a date and location written beneath it in elegant cursive. Her great-grandmother's handwriting, she assumed. The photographs documented life in rural Virginia in the early 1900s. Stern-faced men in suits, women in high-necked dresses, children standing unnaturally still for the camera. Sarah had seen plenty of historical photographs at work, but these were different. These people shared her blood, her name, her DNA. As she turned the pages, one photograph in particular caught her attention. It showed a young couple standing in front of a farmhouse. The man wore a suit with his hair neatly parted. The woman wore a light-colored dress, her hair pinned up in the style of the era. They weren't smiling. Few people did in photographs of that time, but they stood close together, suggesting intimacy. The caption read, "Thomas and Mary Blackwood, Chesapeake County, Virginia, June 1915. Sarah's great-grandparents. She'd seen their wedding portrait before, but never this photograph. Curious, she removed it from its corner mounts to examine it more closely. Something about the image bothered her. The couple stood centered in the frame, the farmhouse behind them. But there was something else, a smudge or shadow near the edge of the porch. Sarah squinted, then grabbed her phone and used the camera to zoom in on the detail. What she saw made her drop the photograph. There was a third person in the image, partially visible, standing in the shadows behind Thomas and Mary. A face, blurry but unmistakably human, peering over their shoulders. Sarah picked up the photo again with trembling fingers. The figure was faint, almost transparent, but definitely there. A chill ran down her spine as she remembered something her grandmother had once mentioned. Thomas's brother William had died 3 months before this photograph was taken. The face in the shadows was smiling. Sarah's phone buzzed, startling her. A text from her boyfriend, Michael. "How's the unpacking going? Want me to bring dinner later?" She texted back quickly, "Found something strange. You need to see this. Yes, to dinner." Outside, the late autumn wind rattled her windows as the sunlight began to fade, casting long shadows across her apartment. Sarah placed the photograph aside and continued unpacking the box, unable to shake the feeling that the smiling face in the photograph was somehow watching her. The following morning, Sarah arrived at the Richmond Historical Society earlier than usual. The massive brick building, once a tobacco warehouse, now housed thousands of documents chronicling Virginia's past. She nodded to the security guard and made her way to her office, the photograph from yesterday tucked securely in her bag. Her colleague Marcus looked up from his computer. "You're here early. New project?" "Personal research," Sarah replied, settling at her desk. "Found some old family photographs that raised questions." "The best kind of mystery," Marcus said with a smile. "Need any help?" Sarah hesitated, then pulled out the photograph. "Actually, yes. What do you make of this?" Marcus took the photograph, examining it carefully. "Nice composition. Early 20th century, I'd guess. Your family?" "Great-grandparents, 1915, but look closer, at the porch." Marcus squinted, then reached for the magnifying glass on his desk. His expression changed as he found what Sarah was pointing out. "That's unusual," he said carefully. "Could be a photographic artifact, a double exposure or light leak. Early photography was prone to anomalies. Or it could be something else," Sarah said quietly. Marcus gave her a sidelong glance. "You mean like a ghost?" "Come on, Sarah. You know better than that. There's always a rational explanation. My great-granduncle William died 3 months before this photo was taken. Typhoid fever. And he lived in that house." Marcus handed the photograph back. "Still doesn't make it supernatural. Look, we have access to some of the best photographic experts in the state. Why don't you let me send this to Dr. Holbrook at UVA? She specializes in early photographic techniques." Sarah nodded. "That would be helpful, thanks. In the meantime, I want to dig deeper into my family history." After Marcus left, Sarah logged into the Society's genealogical database. She had researched her family tree before, but now she focused specifically on William Blackwood, the brother who had died young. The records were sparse. William James Blackwood, born 1888, died March 12, 1915, at age 27. Never married, no children. Cause of death, typhoid fever. There was a brief obituary from a local newspaper mentioning he was survived by his brother Thomas and parents James and Elizabeth Blackwood. Nothing unusual, except for one detail that caught Sarah's attention. The obituary ended with, "The family requests no photographs be taken at the funeral service." An odd request for 1915, when post-mortem photography was still common practice. Why would they specifically prohibit it? Sarah continued searching and found a digitized diary entry from a local woman, Clara Wilkins, who had attended the same church as the Blackwoods. The entry, dated March 15, 1915, read, "Attended young William Blackwood's funeral today. Such a tragedy to die so young." The family seemed distraught, especially Thomas. Most curious was their insistence on a closed casket, despite Reverend Hayes's suggestion that the community should be allowed to pay final respects. Mrs. Blackwood was quite adamant. "No one is to see him," she declared. "No one is to remember him that way." I wonder what she meant. Sarah leaned back in her chair, contemplating this new information. A closed casket was unusual for the time unless the body was badly disfigured. But typhoid fever, while deadly, didn't typically disfigure the victim. Her phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Found anything new about the creepy photo?" Sarah responded, "Maybe. The brother's funeral had a closed casket. Unusual for the time." Michael's reply came quickly. "You're really diving into this. Just be careful. Sometimes family secrets are buried for a reason." Sarah stared at his text, then back at the photograph on her desk. The shadowy figure seemed to be looking directly at her now, its smile almost mocking. "What happened to you, William?" she whispered. "And why are you in this photograph 3 months after you died?" Outside her office window, dark clouds had gathered, casting the room in premature twilight. Sarah shivered and turned on her desk lamp, trying to dispel both the physical darkness and the growing unease that had settled over her. That evening, Sarah spread the contents of her grandmother's box across her living room floor. Michael sat cross-legged beside her, examining the photograph again. "I still think it's probably just a photographic anomaly," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. These old cameras had all sorts of issues with exposure times and plate sensitivity. Sarah barely heard him as she untied one of the ribbon-bound bundles of letters. "These are from my great-grandmother Mary to her sister in Boston," she explained, carefully unfolding the brittle paper of the first letter. "Dated January 1915, before William died." She began to read aloud. "Dearest Elizabeth, I pray this letter finds you well. The winter has been harsh here, with snow piled higher than Thomas can remember in years. We are grateful for the sturdy house, though I confess the constant creaking of the timbers in the cold wind keeps me awake most nights. William continues to cause concern. His behavior grows more erratic by the day. Yesterday, I found him in the field behind the house, standing motionless in the snow without a coat, staring at the tree line. When I called to him, he turned with such a strange smile that I nearly fled back to the house. Thomas insists it is merely the strain of the farm's financial troubles affecting his brother's spirits, but I fear it may be something more troubling. Last week I discovered William had taken down all the mirrors in his bedroom and covered the window with dark cloth. When questioned, he claimed they were watching him through the reflective surfaces. Thomas scolded him severely for frightening me with such talk. Please do not mention my concerns to Mother, as she worries enough about my life here in Virginia. Thomas assures me that spring will bring improvement to William's disposition. Your devoted sister, Mary. Sarah looked up at Michael, whose skeptical expression had faded. That's disturbing, he admitted. There's more, Sarah said, selecting another letter dated February 28, 1915, 2 weeks before William's death. Dearest Elizabeth, I write in haste and great distress. The situation with William has deteriorated beyond what I can bear. Last night, Thomas and I were awakened by terrible sounds from the barn. We found William amidst the frightened livestock, covered in blood, not his own, but that of our prize calf, which lay slaughtered on the ground. When confronted, William claimed he was feeding them so they would leave him be. Thomas was beside himself with rage and grief. The calf represented a significant portion of our spring income. William has been confined to his room. The doctor from town diagnosed nervous exhaustion and prescribed bed rest and laudanum. I fear for our safety, Elizabeth. Yesterday, I caught William watching me as I prepared dinner, with that same terrible smile he wore in the field. When I asked what amused him, he said, "You think you're alive, but you're not. None of us are. Thomas forbids me from sending for help from the asylum in Richmond, insisting family matters must remain private. I pray daily for guidance. Your frightened sister, Mary." Michael shifted uncomfortably. So William was mentally ill before he died. That's sad, but not supernatural. But listen to this, Sarah said, opening the final letter in the bundle, dated March 15, 1915, 3 days after William's reported death. My dearest Elizabeth, by the time you receive this, you will have heard the news of William's passing from typhoid fever. That is what we have told everyone, and that is what you must believe if asked by anyone. The truth I can share only with you, my sister, and you must burn this letter after reading it. William did not die of typhoid. What happened 3 nights ago was something I cannot fully explain, something that has shaken my faith in the rational world. Thomas found William in the attic with father's old hunting knife. He had carved strange symbols into the wooden beams and was sitting in the center of them, chanting words in no language I have ever heard. When Thomas tried to stop him, William turned on him with the knife. There was a struggle. William fell, or was pushed, I cannot be certain as I was not there, down the attic stairs. His neck broke in the fall. The doctor was discreet and agreed to list typhoid as the cause on the death certificate. Reverend Hayes advised a closed casket, given the nature of William's final days and the rumors already circulating about his mental state. But Elizabeth, this is the detail I cannot reconcile. When we prepared William's body for burial, his eyes would not remain closed, and his lips were fixed in that same terrible smile I had grown to fear. Thomas placed pennies on his eyelids, as is custom, but twice they fell away as if pushed. Most disturbing of all, when Thomas finally nailed the coffin shut, we both distinctly heard a sound from within, like soft laughter. I tell myself it was merely the settling of the body or the wood of the coffin adjusting. What else could it be? We buried him yesterday in the family plot behind the church. Thomas has forbidden any mention of William's name in this house henceforth. He has burned William's possessions and plans to seal off his room entirely. I pray that with William's troubled spirit at rest, peace will return to our home. Thomas insists we must carry on as if nothing unusual has occurred. Next month, he wants to have our photograph taken in front of the house. A new beginning, he says. Please, Elizabeth, burn this letter. Some truths should not be preserved. Your devoted sister, Mary. The apartment had grown quiet except for the ticking of the wall clock and the distant sound of traffic. Michael stared at Sarah, his earlier skepticism completely gone. So William didn't die of typhoid, he said slowly. He died in a struggle with his brother after some kind of ritual, and then appeared in their photograph 3 months later. Sarah carefully refolded the letter. According to this, yes. But people create false narratives all the time to cope with tragedy. Mary could have been suffering from her own delusions or simply trying to process a traumatic event. But the photograph, Michael insisted. You can't deny there's something there. No, Sarah admitted. I can't. She picked up the photograph again, studying the shadowy figure with its unmistakable smile. A thought occurred to her, a terrible, chilling thought. What if William wasn't actually dead when they buried him? She whispered. What if he was in some kind of catatonic state that made them think he was dead? That happened sometimes back then. Michael shook his head. Even if that were true, and that's a big if, he couldn't have survived being buried. And he certainly couldn't have somehow escaped the grave to appear in a photograph 3 months later. No, Sarah agreed. Not unless... Unless what? Michael prompted when she didn't continue. Sarah placed the photograph and letters back in their box. Nothing, you're right. There has to be a rational explanation. But as thunder rumbled outside and rain began to patter against her windows, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that William Blackwood's story and smile held secrets her rational mind wasn't prepared to confront. The Chesapeake County Historical Cemetery lay shrouded in morning mist as Sarah's car crunched over the gravel driveway. Despite Michael's protests, she had decided to visit the actual burial site of William Blackwood. Some questions could only be answered at their source. The cemetery caretaker, an elderly man named Jenkins, met her at the small administrative building near the entrance. His eyebrows rose when she explained her research. Blackwood? Sure. We've got that family plot in the west section. Old Virginia family. He pulled out a large map of the grounds and circled a location. Right there, near the oak grove. Been a while since anyone's asked about them. Has the grave of William Blackwood ever been disturbed? Sarah asked hesitantly. Jenkins gave her a curious look. Disturbed how? I don't know. Vandalized? Opened? Anything unusual? The caretaker shook his head slowly. Not that I recall, and I've been here 32 years. Why do you ask? Just family research, Sarah said quickly. One more question. Do you have any records of the burial itself from 1915? Who was present? That sort of thing. Jenkins disappeared into a back room and returned with a dusty, leather-bound book. Cemetery registry, he explained, laying it on the counter and flipping through yellowed pages. March 1915. Here we go. William James Blackwood, interred March 14th, 1915. Present at burial, Thomas and Mary Blackwood, Reverend Elias Hayes, and... He squinted at the faded handwriting. Looks like James and Elizabeth Blackwood, probably the parents. That's all? Sarah asked. No other mourners? Not recorded here. Might have been others not written down, or might have been just family. Not everyone had big funerals back then, especially in cases of infectious disease. He gave her a sympathetic look. Typhoid was no joke in those days. Sarah thanked him and took the map, heading toward the western section of the cemetery. The morning mist still clung to the ground, swirling around the gravestones like ghostly figures. The air was cool and damp, smelling of wet earth and old stone. The Blackwood family plot was marked by a simple iron fence, now rusted with age. Inside were 8 graves, the stones weathered but still legible. Sarah found William's immediately, a simple marker compared to the more elaborate family stones. William James Blackwood, 1888, 1915, at rest. No mention of being a beloved son or brother, no biblical verse or poetic sentiment, just at rest, almost like a command rather than a commemoration. Sarah knelt beside the grave, brushing away fallen leaves. The ground around the marker seemed undisturbed, the grass growing evenly. Whatever had happened to William Blackwood, his physical remains had apparently stayed buried. She pulled out her phone and took several photos of the gravestone, then stepped back to capture the entire family plot. As she reviewed the images, something caught her eye in one of the photos, a dark shape behind one of the larger monuments. Sarah looked up quickly, scanning the cemetery. Nothing seemed out of place, yet she couldn't shake the feeling she was being watched. The mist continued to drift between the gravestones, occasionally forming shapes that her mind tried to interpret as human. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Dr. Holbrook analyzed your photo. Says it's definitely not a double exposure or light leak. Wants to know where you got it. I told her it's family. She's intrigued." Sarah texted back quickly. "Tell her thanks. Any other insights?" Marcus responded. "She said whatever's in that image is actually in the image, not added later. But she can't explain the transparency effect. Says it's inconsistent with known photographic limitations of the era." A chill that had nothing to do with the morning air ran through Sarah. She looked back at William's grave, at the stark simplicity of "at rest." "What were you doing in that attic, William?" she whispered. "What did you unleash?" As if in response, a sudden gust of wind swept through the cemetery, rattling the branches of the nearby oak trees. Several crows took flight, their harsh cries echoing across the silent grounds. Sarah's phone buzzed again. Michael this time. "Where are you? You're not at the cemetery, are you? Sarah, please call me." She was about to reply when she noticed something at the base of William's gravestone that she'd missed before. Kneeling down again, she brushed away more leaves and dirt to reveal a small symbol carved into the base of the stone, not by the stonecutter, but crudely etched by hand at some later date. The symbol matched one of the strange markings Sarah had seen in an old book of folk magic at the Historical Society, a binding sigil meant to keep something in place. As she traced the symbol with her finger, the air around her seemed to grow colder. The mist thickened, and for a brief, terrifying moment, Sarah thought she saw a figure standing among the trees at the edge of the cemetery, a figure with a familiar, unsettling smile. Then her phone rang loudly, breaking the spell. Michael's name flashed on the screen. Sarah answered with shaking hands. "I'm at the cemetery," she said before he could speak. "And Michael, I think I've found something important." Back in her apartment that evening, Sarah sat at her dining table with Michael and Marcus, the three of them examining the new evidence she had gathered at the cemetery. "So you're saying someone carved this symbol on the grave to—" "What? Keep William's spirit trapped?" Marcus asked, skepticism evident in his voice as he studied the photograph of the etched symbol. "I don't know exactly," Sarah admitted, "but it matches old folk magic practices. And given what we know about William's mental state before his death and the circumstances of his burial, it could be a coincidence," Michael suggested, though he sounded less convinced than Marcus. "Or maybe someone added it years later, after hearing stories about the troubled Blackwood brother." Sarah shook her head. "The weathering pattern suggests it's been there a long time, decades at least." "Even if we accept all this," Marcus said, "it doesn't explain how a dead man appeared in a photograph 3 months after his burial." Sarah reached into her grandmother's box and pulled out a small, leather-bound book she had discovered hidden in a false bottom of one of the wooden boxes. "I think this might help explain it. It's Thomas Blackwood's journal, my great-grandfather." She opened it carefully, the binding cracking with age. "Most of it is mundane farm accounts and weather observations, but there are entries about William." She turned to a marked page and read aloud. "April 18th, 1915. It has been 1 month since we laid William to rest. Yet I cannot escape the feeling that something of him remains. Mary reports hearing footsteps in the attic at night, though I have found no evidence of intruders. The livestock continue to act strangely, particularly around William's former bedroom window. Reverend Hayes visited today, ostensibly to check on our welfare, but I suspect he came to ease his own conscience regarding the hasty burial. He asked if we had experienced any unusual occurrences since the funeral. When I inquired as to his meaning, he merely cited biblical passages about troubled spirits. I admitted nothing. What happened with William must remain buried with him. I have not told Mary, but I returned to the grave last week to carve the symbol Mother taught us in childhood, the one meant to bind that which seeks to wander. An old wives' tale, perhaps, but I find comfort in ancient remedies when modern explanations fail. Whatever William was attempting in the attic that night, whatever dark knowledge he sought in those books he ordered from Boston, it died with him. It must have. Sarah turned several pages ahead. June 10th, 1915. The photographer came today to take our portrait in front of the house, as I had arranged months ago. Mary was reluctant, claiming she felt watched whenever she stood on the porch, but I insisted. We must reclaim our home, our lives. During the preparation, the photographer's assistant twice claimed to see someone standing behind us, though when we turned, no one was there. The man's imagination, surely, made nervous by Mary's obvious discomfort. The strangest moment came when the exposure was complete. For an instant, so briefly I might have imagined it, I thought I saw William standing in the doorway, wearing that same unnatural smile he had in his final days. When I blinked, the doorway was empty. The photographer promised to send the finished portrait within the month. I pray it shows only Mary and myself, standing proudly before our home. I pray William's shadow does not linger in the image as it does in my mind. Sarah closed the journal and looked up at her companions. Marcus had lost his skeptical expression, and Michael looked pale. So Thomas knew, Michael said quietly. He suspected something was wrong even before the photograph was developed. And he tried to bind William's spirit to the grave, Sarah added, using folk magic his mother had taught him. But it didn't work, Marcus finished. At least, not completely. Sarah nodded slowly. The question is, what was William doing in that attic? What dark knowledge was he seeking in those books from Boston? And did he find it? Michael asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The three sat in silence for a moment, the implications hanging in the air between them. Finally, Marcus spoke. Elizabeth, Mary's sister in Boston, the one she wrote the letters to. Did she have descendants? Records? Anything that might tell us about these books William ordered? Sarah's eyes widened. I never thought to check that branch of the family tree. Elizabeth would have been my great-grand-aunt. She pulled her laptop over and began searching through genealogical databases. After several minutes of intense concentration, she looked up with excitement. Elizabeth Caldwell, née Reynolds, Mary's sister. She had 2 daughters. The younger one, Catherine, died childless in 1957, but the older one, Ruth, had a son named James Caldwell. Sarah continued, typing rapidly. And James had a daughter named Patricia Caldwell, who married Robert Harmon. They're still alive, living in Cambridge, Massachusetts. We need to contact them, Michael said immediately. See if they have any family records, letters, anything about William or these mysterious books. Sarah was already composing an email, explaining her research and her connection to the Caldwell-Reynolds family line. She attached a scan of Mary's letters to Elizabeth and a photograph of William's grave. Sent, she announced, closing her laptop. Now we wait. As if on cue, the lights in her apartment flickered briefly. Outside, the wind had picked up, whistling around the building's corners. Just a coincidence, Marcus said, though no one had suggested otherwise. Sarah glanced at the photograph of Thomas and Mary Blackwood, with William's smiling face peering from the shadows. For a moment, she thought the smile had widened slightly, but she quickly dismissed the notion as a trick of the fading light. Still, as night settled over Richmond, Sarah couldn't help but feel that by uncovering this long-buried family secret, she had disturbed something that had been waiting patiently for decades, something that was now awake and aware of her interest. 3 days passed without a response from Patricia Harmon. Sarah had almost given up hope when an email notification appeared on her phone during her lunch break at work. The subject line read, Reynolds Blackwood Family Connection. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she opened the message. Dear Miss Blackwood, your email came as quite a shock. My mother rarely spoke of her Virginia relatives, and when she did, it was always with a certain unease that, as a child, I couldn't understand. I do have some family papers from my grandmother Ruth, including correspondence between my great-grandmother Elizabeth and her sister Mary. I've always been curious about the family history, but hesitant to dig too deeply after finding certain disturbing references in these letters. Given your direct connection to the Blackwood line and your professional background in historical research, perhaps it's time these documents found their way to someone who can properly contextualize them. I'm attaching scans of several letters that might interest you. There is also a small journal that belonged to my great-grandmother Elizabeth, in which she makes reference to books she procured for her nephew William in the months before his death. I haven't digitized this yet, but can do so if you think it would be helpful. One final note. My mother always warned me never to display photographs of the Virginia Blackwoods in our home. When I asked why, she would only say, "Some faces shouldn't be captured." I never understood her meaning until seeing the photograph you attached to your email. The resemblance between the figure in the background and an unsigned portrait in my attic is unmistakable. Please contact me if you wish to discuss this further. I must admit to some trepidation about revisiting these old family matters, but perhaps it's time for the truth to emerge. Sincerely, Patricia Harmon. Attached to the email were scans of several letters dated between January and April 1915. Sarah quickly forwarded the email to Michael and Marcus with a brief note. She responded, looking at the attachments now. Sarah opened the first attachment, a letter from Elizabeth Reynolds to her sister Mary, dated January 8, 1915. My dear Mary, I have fulfilled William's request and located the books he sought. It was no easy task, as several are quite rare and required connections to private collectors that my late husband's academic colleagues provided. I confess I am troubled by William's interest in such obscure and frankly disturbing subject matter. Thresholds of the Invisible World by Heinrich Müller is particularly concerning. It was banned in several European countries in the last century for its allegedly blasphemous content regarding the barrier between life and death. The bookseller asked many questions about my purpose in acquiring it, which I deflected as best I could. The other volumes, Eliphas Levi's work on ceremonial magic and the anonymous rituals of passage, while less notorious, contain material that no God-fearing person would find comfortable reading. I send these only because you assured me that William's interest is purely academic, related to his folklore studies. Please impress upon William the need for discretion. Some knowledge once gained cannot be unlearned, and some doors once opened cannot be easily closed. Your concerned sister, Elizabeth. Sarah felt a chill as she read the letter. This matched the timeline in Thomas's journal. William receiving mysterious books from Boston in the months before his death. The second attachment was another letter from Elizabeth, dated March 25, 1915, 2 weeks after William's reported death. My dearest Mary, your letter has left me sleepless and haunted. I cannot help but feel partly responsible for the tragedy that has befallen your household. Had I refused William's requests for those terrible books, perhaps events would have unfolded differently. You ask if I know anything of the symbols William carved or the words he chanted. I do not, though I have made discreet inquiries among Robert's former colleagues at the university. Professor Whitaker, who specializes in ancient religions, grew quite pale when I described the symbol you sketched in your letter. He refused to discuss it further, saying only that it related to threshold crossing and that I should burn any papers containing it. I have done as he suggested with your letter, and I urge you to do the same with any of William's writings you may find. Some knowledge is too dangerous to preserve, even in the name of family history. As for your concerns about the house itself, the strange sounds, the livestock's behavior, the sensation of being watched, I can offer little comfort except to suggest you consider leaving that place. Property can be replaced. Peace of mind cannot. I pray daily for your safety and Thomas's. Please write again soon to assure me of your well-being. Your devoted sister, Elizabeth. The third attachment was not a letter, but a page from what appeared to be Elizabeth's personal journal, dated June 30th, 1915. I received the most disturbing item in today's post, a photograph from Mary showing her and Thomas standing before their Virginia farmhouse. She wrote nothing in her accompanying note, but I understand her silent question. Do I see what she sees? Indeed I do. Though faint, the image of William is unmistakable, standing in the shadows behind them, with that same unnatural smile Mary described in her letters before his death. I took the photograph to Professor Whitaker, breaking my promise never to speak of these matters again. His reaction confirmed my worst fears. He examined it through his magnifying glass, then abruptly returned it to me, his hand shaking. "The threshold has been crossed," he said, "but incompletely. He is neither fully here nor fully there, but suspended between worlds." When I asked what could be done, the professor's answer chilled me. Nothing must be done. Any attempt to resolve such a situation risks widening the breach. The best hope is that the image remains contained within this photograph and doesn't spread. I asked what he meant by spread, but he refused to elaborate, insisting instead that I keep the photograph secured where few would see it. "Images have power," he said. "They capture more than mere light and shadow." I have locked the photograph in Robert's old desk drawer. I will not destroy it, as it may be the only evidence of what truly occurred, but neither will I look upon it again. Some faces should remain in darkness. Sarah sat back in her chair, her lunch forgotten. Elizabeth's words echoed in her mind. Images have power. They capture more than mere light and shadow. She quickly typed a response to Patricia Harmon, thanking her for the documents and requesting scans of Elizabeth's journal, particularly any entries referring to William or the mysterious books. As Sarah pressed send, her office lights flickered again. A brief dimming followed by a surge of brightness. Her computer screen went black for a moment, then returned to normal. A notification appeared in her email. "Message could not be sent. Network error." Sarah frowned and tried again. The same error appeared. Her office phone rang, startling her. It was the security desk downstairs. "Miss Blackwood, there's someone here asking for you. Says he's related to you, a William Blackwood. Should I send him up?" Sarah's blood ran cold. "What does he look like?" she managed to ask, her voice barely steady. "Older gentleman, maybe 70s. Well-dressed, but seems a bit confused. Says he has information about your family photographs." Relief washed over Sarah. Not a ghost or hallucination, just an elderly relative she hadn't met before. Perhaps another descendant researching the family history. "I'll come down," she told the security guard. As she rode the elevator to the lobby, Sarah tried to place this William Blackwood in her family tree. Could he be named after the original William? A grandson of Thomas's, perhaps, through some branch she hadn't traced? The elevator doors opened, and Sarah stepped into the lobby. The security guard pointed to a man sitting in one of the visitor chairs, his back to her. "Mr. Blackwood," Sarah called as she approached. "I'm Sarah Blackwood." The man stood and turned to face her. He was indeed elderly, with thinning white hair and a well-tailored suit that seemed slightly out of date. His face was lined with age, but his eyes were bright and alert. And he was smiling, the same unnatural smile she had seen in the photograph. "Hello, Sarah," he said, his voice surprisingly strong for his apparent age. "I've been waiting a very long time to meet you." The Historical Society's small cafe was nearly empty at this late lunch hour. Sarah sat across from the elderly man who called himself William Blackwood, a cup of untouched coffee growing cold before her. She had suggested the public space rather than her office, instinctively wanting witnesses nearby. "You're not really William Blackwood," Sarah said quietly, studying the old man's face. Despite the unsettling smile, nothing about him seemed supernatural. He was just an elderly man with pale blue eyes and liver-spotted hands that trembled slightly as he lifted his own coffee cup. "Not the original William, no," the man agreed, his smile softening to something more natural. "I'm William James Blackwood III, named after my grandfather, who was named after his uncle, your great-grand-uncle. Most people call me Bill." Sarah relaxed slightly, but remained cautious. "How did you find me?" "The same way you've been finding information about our family. Research." He pulled out a leather portfolio and removed several documents. "I've been tracing the Blackwood history for decades. When the Richmond Historical Society digitized their archives last year, your name appeared as the digital archivist responsible for several Blackwood family documents. The coincidence was too perfect to ignore. And you just happened to visit today, right when I'm researching William's photograph." Sarah couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. Bill's smile faded entirely. "Not a coincidence. I've been monitoring database searches related to certain Blackwood keywords for years. Your recent queries about William's death and the 1915 photograph triggered an alert. I drove down from Alexandria as soon as I saw it." "That's dedicated," Sarah said, unsure whether to be impressed or unnerved. "Necessary," Bill corrected. "Our family has safeguarded this story for generations. When information starts to surface, we intervene." "Safeguarded or suppressed?" Sarah challenged. Bill leaned forward. "Both, for good reason." He glanced around the cafe, then lowered his voice. "What do you know about what William was doing before he died?" Sarah hesitated, then decided to be direct. "I know he ordered occult books from Boston. I know he performed some kind of ritual in the attic. I know he died in a struggle with Thomas, not from typhoid. And I know he somehow appeared in a photograph 3 months after his burial." Bill nodded slowly. "You've found more than most, but not the whole truth." He pulled out an old leather-bound volume from his portfolio. "This is one of the books William acquired, Thresholds of the Invisible World. The only surviving copy, as far as I know." Sarah stared at the book, her archivist's instincts noting its age and condition, even as her personal concerns flared. "You kept it, even knowing what it led to?" "Knowledge itself isn't dangerous, only its application," Bill said. "My grandfather, Thomas's son, believed understanding what happened was the only way to prevent it from happening again." He opened the book carefully to a marked page. "William wasn't insane. At least, not initially. He was grieving. His fiancée, Charlotte, died in 1914, consumption. They'd kept the engagement private because her family disapproved of the match." "I never found any mention of a fiancé," Sarah said, surprised. "The family deliberately removed her from the records after what happened." Bill turned the book toward Sarah. "This section describes a ritual to create what the author calls a permeable threshold, essentially a doorway between life and death." Sarah reluctantly looked at the page. It contained dense text in archaic language and disturbing illustrations of symbols, including the one she had found carved on William's gravestone. William was trying to bring Charlotte back, she realized aloud. Bill nodded grimly. "But the ritual requires balance, a life for a life. William intended to sacrifice animals, thinking that would be sufficient. It wasn't. And so what happened? According to my grandfather's research, William completed part of the ritual, creating a threshold but not fully opening it. He became trapped between worlds himself, not fully dead when buried, not fully alive after death. The struggle with Thomas interrupted the ritual at its most dangerous point. Sarah thought of the letters, the journal entries, and the photograph captured this state, this between worlds existence. Photographs capture light reflected off physical objects, Bill said. Whatever William became could somehow manipulate light, make himself visible to the camera in a way the human eye couldn't consistently perceive. It sounded impossible, yet Sarah had seen the evidence herself. Why are you telling me all this? Why not just let the past stay buried? Bill's expression grew serious. Because you've done something dangerous, Sarah. You've been spreading the image, scanning it, sending it digitally, showing it to others. Each time that photograph is reproduced, the threshold weakens. That's superstition, Sarah protested, though uncertainty crept into her voice. Is it? Bill challenged. Have you experienced anything unusual since finding the photograph? Electrical disturbances, the feeling of being watched, glimpses of movement in reflective surfaces? Sarah's silence was answer enough. My grandfather spent his life researching what William started, Bill continued. He believed that with enough reproductions, enough witnesses to William's state, the threshold could be fully opened, with catastrophic consequences, not just for William to return, but for the barrier between life and death to be fundamentally damaged. So what do we do? Sarah asked, her skepticism giving way to a creeping dread. Bill reached into his portfolio again and removed a small cloth bag. First, we contain what's already been released. This is a mixture my grandfather developed, salt from the Dead Sea, graveyard dirt, and other components I'm not at liberty to share. It needs to be applied to the original photograph while reciting certain words. He handed Sarah a folded paper with a short paragraph written in faded ink. Then we need to track down every digital copy and destroy them. Your colleagues who've seen it need to be convinced it was simply an old photograph with a camera flaw, nothing more. And if I think this is all elaborate nonsense? Sarah asked, though she made no move to leave. Bill's smile returned, not the unnatural one she had first seen, but a sad, knowing expression. Then ask yourself why the lights have been flickering since you found the photograph. Why your emails to Patricia Harmon aren't sending. Why you feel someone watching you when you're alone. Sarah glanced up at the cafe's lights, which had been steady throughout their conversation. How did you know about the lights? Because it always begins the same way, Bill said quietly. With small disturbances in electrical fields, William is gathering energy, preparing to fully materialize. My father experienced it in 1972 when he found the photograph in my grandfather's effects. I experienced it in 1998 when cataloguing the family archives. He leaned forward, his voice urgent but calm. You need to decide, Sarah. Continue your research and risk opening a door that should remain closed, or help me secure what our family has been protecting for over a century. Sarah looked at the book, the cloth bag, the paper with its handwritten incantation. Everything she knew as a rational, educated woman in the 21st century told her this was absurd superstition. But the image of William's smile in that photograph, the same smile she had momentarily seen on Bill's face when he first turned toward her, lingered in her mind. I need to think, she said finally. Bill nodded and gathered his materials. You have until sunset. After that, it becomes harder to contain. He handed her a business card with a phone number. Call me when you decide. But Sarah, his eyes met hers with intense seriousness. Don't look at the original photograph again until then. Not alone. As Bill walked away, Sarah sat motionless, the business card in her hand. Through the cafe window, she watched him cross the street to a waiting car. For a brief moment as he opened the car door, his reflection in the window seemed to shift, becoming younger, his hair darker, his posture straighter, and that smile, that terrible, unnatural smile, returned for just an instant. Then he was gone, the car pulling away into Richmond's midday traffic, leaving Sarah with an impossible choice between scientific skepticism and the growing certainty that some doors were indeed meant to remain closed. Sarah spent the afternoon in a daze, unable to focus on her work. Bill Blackwood's warnings echoed in her mind, competing with her rational instincts. As a historian and archivist, she valued evidence and documentation above all else. Destroying historical materials went against everything she believed professionally, yet the evidence itself suggested something beyond rational explanation. At 4:30 p.m., she called Michael. "Can you meet me at my apartment after work? And bring Marcus if he's free? I need to talk to you both about something important." "Is this about the photo again?" Michael asked. "Did you hear back from that Harmon woman?" "Yes, and I met someone else today, a distant Blackwood relative. He had information." Michael must have heard something in her voice. "Are you okay? You sound strange." "I'm fine. Just meet me there at 6, okay?" After hanging up, Sarah packed the original photograph in an archival envelope and slipped it into her bag. Despite Bill's warning, she needed to show it to Michael and Marcus one more time before making her decision. The sky was already darkening with approaching storm clouds as she left work, promising an early sunset. In her car, the radio switched stations by itself twice, settling on static before Sarah turned it off completely. At her apartment, Sarah laid out everything on her dining table. The original photograph, the letters, Thomas's journal, and her notes from the meeting with Bill. She had just finished when her doorbell rang. Michael arrived first, followed 10 minutes later by Marcus. Sarah made coffee and led them to the table. "So what's this all about?" Marcus asked, eyeing the spread of documents. "Your text sounded urgent." Sarah took a deep breath. "I need to decide whether to destroy the original photograph and all its digital copies, or continue the research and risk consequences." She recounted her meeting with Bill Blackwood, trying to present his warnings as neutrally as possible, despite how outlandish they sounded. "Let me get this straight," Marcus said when she finished. "This old guy claims the photograph is some kind of doorway, and by reproducing it, we're weakening the barrier between life and death." "That's what he believes," Sarah confirmed, "and what his family has believed for generations." "It's superstition," Marcus declared flatly. "Interesting from a folkloric perspective, but not something a rational person would take seriously." Michael looked less certain. "But you have to admit, there's something strange about all this. The image in the photograph, the timing of this Bill person showing up just as Sarah's research intensifies. Coincidences," Marcus insisted, "and family delusions passed down through generations. People create elaborate mythologies to explain tragedies all the time." Sarah removed the photograph from its envelope. "But what about this? How do you explain William appearing here 3 months after his death?" As she placed the photograph on the table, the lights in her apartment dimmed momentarily. All three of them noticed. "Power fluctuation," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. Sarah looked at the photograph more closely. Something had changed since she last examined it. William's figure in the background seemed more distinct, less transparent, and his smile, it appeared wider, more pronounced. "Does he look clearer to you?" she asked, pushing the photograph toward her friends. Michael leaned in, then drew back sharply. "Yes, definitely more visible than before." Even Marcus appeared troubled. "Could be the lighting in here compared to your office." Thunder rumbled outside as the storm approached. Sarah's apartment lights flickered again, longer this time. In the momentary darkness, Sarah thought she saw a figure standing in the hallway leading to her bedroom, just a silhouette, there and gone when the lights returned. "We need to decide," she said urgently. "Either we destroy this now, following Bill's instructions, or we commit to understanding exactly what's happening, whatever the risk." Marcus ran a hand through his hair, his skepticism visibly wavering. "If, and that's a big if, there's even a fraction of truth to this, shouldn't we document it? This could be groundbreaking evidence of something beyond current scientific understanding." "Or it could be exactly what Bill warned about," Michael countered. "Opening a door better left closed." Sarah looked at the photograph again. William's image had definitely changed. He appeared to be standing slightly closer to Thomas and Mary than before, his outline more defined against the farmhouse background. The lights flickered once more, and this time all three of them saw it. A shadow moving across the wall, shaped like a man but elongated, stretching from floor to ceiling before disappearing. "What the hell was that?" Marcus whispered, his skepticism finally shattered. Sarah's phone rang. An unknown number. She answered and heard Bill Blackwood's voice, tense and urgent. "Have you decided? The threshold is thinning. I can feel it from here." "How did you get my number?" Sarah demanded. "That doesn't matter," Bill said sharply. "You need to perform the containment ritual now. Is the photograph exposed? Are people looking at it?" "Yes," Sarah admitted. "Cover it immediately. Don't let anyone else see it." As if responding to Bill's words, the lights in Sarah's apartment went out completely. In the sudden darkness, illuminated only by the faint glow of streetlights through the windows, the three friends froze. A soft, scraping sound came from the direction of the dining table, like paper sliding across wood. When the lights flickered back on seconds later, the photograph had moved. It now lay in the center of the table, and William's image had changed again. He was no longer standing behind Thomas and Mary. He was standing beside them, and he was looking directly at Sarah. "We need to do it," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "The containment ritual, now." Even Marcus nodded, his face pale. "Okay, what do we need?" Sarah reached for her bag to retrieve Bill's cloth pouch and the paper with the incantation, but stopped when she felt the hairs on the back of her neck rise. Slowly, she turned toward the hallway again. A figure stood there, not a shadow this time, but the distinct shape of a man, blurry as if viewed through frosted glass. His features were indistinct except for one detail, a wide, unnatural smile. The lights went out again. In the darkness, Sarah fumbled for her phone, activating its flashlight. The beam cut through the blackness, illuminating the dining table and the photograph still lying at its center. "William's gone from the picture," Michael whispered, pointing at the photograph. He was right. The image now showed only Thomas and Mary Blackwood standing in front of their farmhouse. The shadowy figure that had been William was completely absent. A cold draft swept through the apartment despite the closed windows. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees in seconds. "We need to leave," Marcus said. All traces of his earlier skepticism evaporated. "Now?" "No," Sarah countered, her voice steadier than she felt. "If we leave the photograph behind, and it's the focus of whatever this is." She reached again for her bag, and this time successfully retrieved Bill's cloth pouch and the paper with the incantation. "We need to complete the containment ritual." "In the dark?" Michael asked incredulously. As if in response, Sarah's phone flashlight began to dim, the battery draining visibly, despite being nearly full minutes before. "Quick," she said, emptying the pouch onto the table. A mixture of grayish powder spilled out beside the photograph. With shaking hands, Sarah unfolded the paper with the incantation, holding it close to the fading phone light. The words were in Latin, a language she had studied briefly in college. The pronunciation would be difficult, but she had to try. "Quod fuit apertum, nunc claudatur," she began reading. "Quod fuit divisum, nunc uniatur, spiritus inter mundos, revertere ad locum tuum." As she spoke, the powder on the table began to move, seemingly of its own accord, forming a circle around the photograph. "Sigillum hoc confirmo," Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger. "Limen claudo, viam obstruo." A sudden gust of wind blew through the apartment, scattering papers from the table, but leaving the photograph and the circle of powder untouched. Sarah's phone light flickered and died completely, plunging them into darkness again. "Sarah!" Michael called, his voice tight with fear. "Where are you?" "Still here," she replied. "Keep talking so I can find you." "Something's in here with us," Marcus said, his voice coming from near the apartment door. "I can feel it." Sarah reached blindly across the table, her fingers finding the photograph. It felt ice-cold to the touch, like a piece of metal left outside in winter. She continued the incantation from memory, hoping she remembered the words correctly. Umbra et lux, vita et mors, in equilibrio maneant, per hoc signum per hanc vocem ita fiat. As she spoke the final words, a flash of lightning illuminated the apartment through the windows, followed immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. For that brief, brilliant moment, all three friends saw the same thing. A figure standing on the other side of the table, a young man in early 20th century clothing, his face contorted in that terrible, unnatural smile. William Blackwood, looking exactly as he had in 1915. In the returning darkness, Sarah felt rather than saw something reach for the photograph beneath her fingers. A cold hand brushed against hers, sending a shock of terror through her body. "No!" she cried, pressing her palm firmly onto the photograph and the powder surrounding it. "You can't come through. This isn't your world anymore." Another flash of lightning, another glimpse of William, closer now, his hand extended toward the photograph, his smile unchanged, but his eyes filled with a desperate hunger. In that moment of illumination, Sarah noticed something she had missed before. A thin, almost invisible thread of light extending from the photograph to William's chest, pulsing like a heartbeat. Understanding dawned. The photograph wasn't just a capture of William's image, it was his anchor, his connection to the physical world. When darkness fell again, Sarah acted on instinct. Instead of continuing with Bill's ritual, she grabbed the photograph and moved quickly toward her kitchen. "Sarah," Michael called, panic in his voice, "what are you doing?" "Breaking the connection," she replied, fumbling in a drawer for matches. She found them just as another lightning flash revealed William standing in the kitchen doorway, no longer smiling. His face was twisted with rage, his form more solid than before. Sarah struck a match, its small flame creating a bubble of light in the darkness. She held the photograph over the sink and touched the flame to its corner. "No!" The voice that filled the apartment wasn't human, a howling, distorted sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The photograph caught fire, curling as the flames spread across its surface. William lunged forward, his hand reaching for Sarah's throat. She felt cold fingers brush her skin and then pass through her, as insubstantial as mist. William's form flickered like a faulty television signal, his edges blurring, his features distorting. As the photograph burned, he seemed to be burning with it, his image dissolving into fragments of light and shadow. The apartment lights came back on suddenly, revealing Michael and Marcus standing in the kitchen doorway, their faces pale with shock. In front of them, William Blackwood's figure continued to disintegrate, breaking apart into wisps of darkness that faded into nothing. His eyes met Sarah's one final time, no longer filled with rage, but with something that might have been relief. Then he was gone, leaving only the ashes of the photograph in the sink and the lingering scent of smoke in the air. The sudden silence was broken by Sarah's phone ringing on the dining table. She walked shakily back to answer it, already knowing who it would be. "Bill," she said simply. "It's done," Bill Blackwood's voice replied, sounding tired but satisfied. "I felt it break. You destroyed the photograph instead of containing it." "It seemed like the right thing to do," Sarah said. "The photograph was his anchor." "A more permanent solution," Bill agreed. "My grandfather would have approved, though it means the loss of a historical artifact." "Some history is better not preserved," Sarah said, looking at Michael and Marcus, who were still standing speechless in the kitchen doorway. "Indeed," Bill said, "though I suspect you'll keep some record of what happened. Historians always do." After hanging up, Sarah returned to the dining table, where the letters, journals, and her notes remained scattered. Evidence of a family secret that had nearly escaped its bonds after a century of containment. "What do we do now?" Marcus asked, finally finding his voice. Sarah gathered the documents slowly. "We archive them, properly, securely, and we make sure no one reproduces that photograph again." Will anyone believe what happened here? Michael wondered. Probably not, Sarah admitted. But that's the point, isn't it? Some stories are better left as mysteries, some thresholds better left uncrossed. Outside, the storm was passing, the rain tapering to a gentle patter against the windows. The oppressive feeling that had filled the apartment was gone, replaced by an ordinary silence. Sarah looked at the empty space where William Blackwood had stood minutes before. For over a century, he had existed in a state between worlds, neither fully dead nor truly alive, bound to a photograph taken 3 months after his physical death. Now, perhaps, he was finally at rest. 1 month later, Sarah locked her office at the Richmond Historical Society, a new archive box tucked securely under her arm. The building was quiet at this late hour, most of the staff having left for the weekend. She nodded to the night security guard as she made her way to the climate-controlled archival storage room in the basement. The box was labeled simply Blackwood Family Papers, 1914-1915, restricted access. Inside were the letters between Mary and Elizabeth, Thomas's journal, Sarah's detailed notes about her investigation, and written statements from Michael and Marcus about what they had witnessed in her apartment. Not included was any reproduction of the photograph itself, not even a description detailed enough to allow someone to visualize it accurately. Some doors were better left closed. As Sarah used her keycard to enter the archival room, she reflected on the past month. The electrical disturbances had ceased completely. Her dreams, initially haunted by William's smile, had gradually returned to normal. Life had moved on, as it always did. Bill Blackwood had called once more, a week after the incident, to check on her and to thank her for her help in resolving a family matter. He had sounded older, frailer than when they had met. More like the elderly man he appeared to be, without the unsettling vitality he had displayed in the Historical Society's lobby. Sarah found the appropriate shelf for the new box, placing it between other restricted collections that required special permission to access. She had created a finding aid that revealed enough to be historically useful without exposing the full truth of what had happened. As she closed the storage room door behind her, Sarah felt a sense of completion. The historian in her had documented the events as accurately as possible. The Blackwood descendant in her had protected both her family's legacy and the wider world from dangers they couldn't comprehend. Walking back through the quiet building, Sarah paused at the main exhibition hall, where a new display of early Virginia photography was being installed. Portraits of solemn families, landscapes of rural farms, snapshots of a world long gone, all carefully preserved behind glass. Images capturing moments in time, windows to the past. Sarah thought of William Blackwood, who had sought to create a different kind of window, a doorway between worlds, and had instead become trapped in the threshold himself, all for love of a woman who had died too young. Outside, the evening air was cool and crisp with early autumn. Sarah breathed deeply, appreciating the simple pleasure of being firmly grounded in one world, one reality. The stars were appearing in the darkening sky, distant points of light in the vast unknown. Some mysteries were meant to remain unsolved, some boundaries meant to remain uncrossed. But as a historian, Sarah knew that no secret stayed buried forever. Someday, perhaps long after she was gone, someone else might stumble upon the Blackwood family papers and begin asking the same questions she had. Would they find the same answers? Would they make the same choice? Sarah couldn't know. All she could do was leave enough breadcrumbs to warn them, enough gaps to make them pause before going too far. As she reached her car, Sarah glanced back at the Historical Society building, its windows glowing warmly against the gathering darkness. For a brief moment she thought she saw a figure standing at one of the upper windows, a silhouette watching her. Then she blinked, and it was gone. Just a trick of the light, a shadow where there shouldn't be one. Sarah smiled to herself and got into her car. Some things were better left to the imagination. After all, images have power. They capture more than mere light and shadow, and some faces should remain in darkness.